Here's the clue to really affecting people. Start with where they are before you try to take them to where you want them to go. Meet people where they are. If somebody's hurting, you got to meet in the hurt. If somebody's in trouble, you got to start with the trouble. Here's some more pieces to the communication challenge. Number one, identification. Learning to identify. This is a real challenge. Now, it's not too difficult if somebody's like you. The real challenge is to identify with somebody who's not like you. In a wider range of teaching all of this, here's the reaction you want from identification. Me too. You just want the reaction for somebody to say, me too. I understand what that's like. I've been there. So part of it is trying to translate your experiences into words so that someone will identify with it and say, me too. Here's the reaction you don't want. So what? Now, it's easy if you're not careful to load your presentation with a lot of so whats. Mr. Schoaf, who only went to the 8th grade in school, but he gave me the classic point to ponder here when I was 25 years old. And it was put in such simple terms, I've never forgotten it. Let me put it in those same terms for you. Here's what he said. Learn to express, not impress. That was so helpful for me, because it's easy to engage in language just designed to impress instead of express. But Schoaf said if you want to touch somebody, learn to express. Sincerity from the heart, not impress. Impress builds a gulf. Express builds a bridge. Identification. This is a whole wide subject in itself. The identification question is, what will make me real to my audience? What will make me real to the child? Identification is building a bridge. If you're meeting somebody for the first time, it's simply getting acquainted. Building a bridge, making contact. Here's one of the clues. Find something you have in common. That's where you start, something you have in common. At our ranch up at Clear Lake, when we have seminars, everybody gets acquainted real easy. And one of the reasons is because almost everybody gets lost trying to find it. Right? What a great way, right? Did you get as lost as I did trying to find this place? Right? Somebody says, yeah, was that you up there taking the wrong turn? I thought that was you. What a great way to get acquainted. We've just had an experience recently that's been similar, like getting lost. So identification is finding something in common. Here's the clue to really affecting people. Start with where they are before you try to take them to where you want them to go. Meet people where they are. If somebody's hurting, you got to meet in the hurt. If somebody's in trouble, you got to start with the trouble. One of the greatest communicators of all time, Paul, apostle of early Christian history, didn't have any problem talking to sinners because he claimed to be chief sinner. Wow, what an identification point. Do you think sinners would listen to chief sinner? Of course. He said, tell me about being a sinner. I'm number one sinner. Got the plaque on the wall. What a way to begin, right, if he's talking to sinners. The key is to start where somebody is. If they're in trouble, you got to start with trouble. You can't talk success if somebody's in trouble. You got to start, first of all, talking trouble. Now, if you've never been in trouble, you got a problem. So, I suggest here that you get in a little trouble. So you know how to talk trouble. Right? Get arrested for something. So that when somebody is stricken in the heart, and you've had this experience, maybe not as deeply, but somewhat of an experience of being stricken in the heart. When you meet somebody and you're trying to help them, you can talk about being stricken in the heart, and it'll have substance, it'll have meaning, it'll have depth. And you start there, and then start building the bridge and start building the path towards solving the problem. Identification. How do you identify with a child? It's tough. What if the adult is 40 and the child is 12? We call that a long bridge. How do you bridge the gap between 40 and 12? It isn't easy. In fact, we used to call it the generation gap. And how do you manage the skills that builds the bridge over the generation gap? Well, there's some answers here. Here's number one. Remember when you were 12. You've just got to have the skill to go back. This is what an actor does. They go back. They rehearse the early hurts and emotions, the trauma and the drama of the sum total of their life back in the early years. You just got to go back through all that and let it affect you one more time. Let it wash over you one more time. Let it rekindle one more time. You say, well, it may be painful. That's true, but you got to go back through these pains in order to reach some people that are in pain. So part of it is to remember when you were 12. I don't have much problem with 12-year-olds because I remember almost every day of being 12. 12 is a fascinating year. One of the challenges of being 12 is you're not 13. If I heard it once, I heard it 100 times when I was 12. You're only 12. As if that was some awful place to be. Right? The teenagers would say, of course you can't go. You're only 12. I thought, wow. I can't wait to be rid of 12 and become a teenager. So, pretty frustrating. You just got to go back and remember that. If you want to reach somebody 12, you just got to remember 12. Did you ever get chosen last when you were a kid? That's an awesome experience. They're choosing up sides. I'll take you, I'll take you, I'll take you. And then you're last and you're standing there. And the next leader says, well, I guess I'll have to take you. Right? Wow, what an awesome experience. But you just got to go back and relive that. Let it smite you one more time. Let it hit you and let it hurt you. Because, see, to really affect people, you got to be moved. And you got to be touched. And without moving and touching of life experiences, whatever emotion it calls for, there are some people you can't reach. Here's another key way to reach the kids. Read all their books. Here's what it's called. Do your homework. Lack of homework shows in the marketplace. Lack of homework shows at home. See, if a child has read this book, and I read the book, one of the great places we can meet is in the book. I say to the child, remember the story where right away they're going to be impressed that I've done my homework. And the kid says, did you read that book? I said, yes, I read all those books. They say, wow. But I say, remember the story where? They say, I remember that story. I say, well, that's about like now. Not exactly, but it's pretty close. And the child says, oh, I see, I see. Now they can see because we went back to the common seeing that was in the book. But if you miss the book and don't do your homework, I'm telling you, you'll miss a chance to identify. Here's the big challenge, identifying with somebody who's not like you in color or religion or circumstance. How do the successful reach and touch somebody who isn't successful? Well, first of all, they've got to talk about their struggle, not their success. Let me give you the clue to good identification. Your struggle will more often identify than your success. If you've got an hour to talk and you spend 59 minutes on your success story, we call that building a gulf, not a bridge. You've got to spend most of the time on your struggle, most of the time on your fears, most of the time on your apprehensions. Most of the time you hesitated, most of the time you were about to give it up. You've got to spend some time on that. That's called identification and building a bridge. Then take them by the hand and then show them your success when it has meaning because it came from struggle, it came from decision, and it came maybe from heartbreak, and it came maybe from the same position the person finds themselves in that you're talking to. Identification. What makes you real? That's so important. Part of identification is proper word choice. Jesus said to his disciples one day, today I'm going to teach you how to fish. What an important choice of words, fish. Who is he talking to? Fishermen. We call that brilliant. He didn't say, I'm going to teach you how to recruit. No, what did they know from recruit? These fishermen don't know recruit. And if you keep insisting on saying recruit to fishermen, we call you naive. You got to change your vocabulary. He said, I now wish to teach you how to become fishermen. Now, see, they understood that language. He said winning people is a lot like fishing. Now, see, they understood that story. If it's like fishing, we can figure it out. Here's the next clue to identification. Beware of using inside lingo on the outside world. Sometimes inside, some little catchy phrases become comfortable, but outside, they become strange. The man said to me, we've got to get into the Word. We've got to spend more time in the Word. I thought, how small would you have to be? Now, what I found out later he meant was, we should read the Bible more. Now, see, that would have made sense to me. Right? But the into the word, we call that kind of strangey language. And you got to be careful of strangey language on what we call the outside world. You got to learn to shift gears. The lady said to me, I've learned how to handle my space. She said, how are you doing with your space? I thought, space? What's a space? Now, I found out later she'd been to the space seminars. And she'd learned the kind of spacey language, space. But see, you got to be careful. You talk space to a lot of people, and they go back like this. Say, space. What's this space? Right? Now, the people that have been through the space seminars can understand the spacey language. But if somebody hasn't, you got to learn to what we call shift gears into an appropriate word choice depending on your audience. It's called the gift of language in a variety of awareness to learn how to choose the right words and the right phrases depending on who you're talking to. We call this awareness. We call this being non-lazy. We call this being sharp in perception to know who you're talking to and how to choose the words that'll make sense. Identification. You've got to identify with the sorrow by recalling your own sorrow. Identify with the joy by recalling your own joy. Identify with the difficulty by rehearsing your own difficulty. Here's one of the best clues in learning to better identify. Go back over your own life and make a study of your own life, your circumstances, your feelings, your awareness. Some of the stories you haven't told for a long time. Some of the experiences you've had. Now, sometimes when you've freshly come from an experience, it isn't that easy to translate it and it isn't that easy to talk about it. But as the time passes and you can take a more thoughtful approach to your experiences, the key is not to lose the intensity of it, but to become more educated in using the intensity of your experiences to weave into the next conversation. And by the gift of language and emotion, touch somebody's life, reach somebody, affect somebody, persuade somebody. Identification. Very important subject. Here's the next part of a good presentation. It's what we call logic and reason. If you're trying to persuade a child, talk to a child, or talk to an audience, or if you're trying to talk to a customer. Part of any presentation is the logical part, the facts and the figures, and the numbers and the dimensions. And we won't linger too long here because here's my point on logic and reason. It's got to be brief. We need some facts, but only enough facts to start the decision-making process. You got to beware not to cover too many facts. I'm sure we've all heard the expression, it's possible to talk somebody into buying, keep on talking, talk them out of buying. Here's where this problem usually occurs. Even if it's a child, you can talk a child into deciding, and then you keep on talking, and then they undecide. We talk past, too much logic, too much reason. We need just enough logic and reason so that it starts to make sense, not so that you understand it all. If you walk into the new car showroom and express an interest in an automobile, salesman comes along and says, let me tell you about this car. You say, okay. He says, follow me. And he takes you out back into the shop. And he opens up the shop manual on the car and says, let's start with the left front wheel. Right away, you would say, hold it. He says, this is going to take a long time. We got 1,000 facts here to go through. You'd say, hold it. You don't need 1,000 facts to decide about this automobile. How many facts do you need? About a half dozen. And if somebody makes the mistake of going beyond the half dozen, here's what they're going to do. Lose their audience. So you got to make sure you don't get into too wide range of facts and logic. Because here's why. Most decisions are made emotionally. We need just enough logic so that it makes sense, but we're going to do it probably out of emotion. So the key is to be brief. With logic, reasons, facts. Because too much of anything is too much, right, at one time. What if you sat down to a steak dinner and you were real hungry, so you cleaned it all up? What if they cleared that away and brought you another one? Well, let's say you're real hungry, so you go for the second one. What if they cleared that away and brought you the third one? See, that third one doesn't look good. In fact, if you start on it, you'll probably lose the whole thing, right? I mean, too much is too much. So, brevity on logic and reason. It needs to be powerful, it needs to be factual, but brief. Number 3, learning to attack the problem. It's so important to mount a precise attack on the problem. Because one of the best ways to help somebody in communication is learn to attack the problem, to attack what's wrong. But here's the refinement of the skill that leaders must have. To attack the problem, but not the person. We also express this particular part called attack and confess. One of the best ways to attack something is to confess you've had the problem. Use yourself as example 1. Then use some others we call third party. Let me tell you about Mary. If Mary was here, she would confess, but she isn't here, so I'll confess for her. She put it off. She had the problem. And if she was here, she might even try to persuade you with tears. Right? We call that third party. But one of the best is to use party 1, called you, to attack the problems. Now, what are some of the things that need to be attacked? Let me just give you some examples. It's a pretty long list, but we'll have to just be sufficiently satisfied with a few, and you can continue these studies on your own. Procrastination. That's a good one, front and center. We've got to attack procrastination because it's so insidious. It eats up such large chunks of your life and leaves you in a small corner. Putting it off. Delaying. Letting it slide. Now, I'm one of the best to attack procrastination because I confess to being one of the all-time great procrastinators. I've done a lot of things, but I've put a lot of things off. Procrastination. I am so good, I could teach it. Procrastination. I can show you how to do it so it don't show. I mean, I'm so good. I'm so good. But I also know the pain of procrastination. I also know the regret that comes from procrastination. I can also show you pieces of my life missing, never to be repaired, because I let it slide. Now, see, if we all studied our own lives, and we're trying to help somebody with this insidious disease of procrastination and putting it off, front and center, we use ourselves as best example, because you feel the strongest about your own experiences and your own emotions. Do you think you could help somebody with procrastination? Developing this skill of going back, rehearsing your own life, and coming up with the essence of the emotion and the experience to try to illustrate to somebody how insidious it can become and how devastating it can leave your life and what'll be missing if you let it slide. That's what we call learning to attack the problem. Now, underline the word attack. It's very important to go after the insidious. The great leader of the Christians says, "The things I once hated I now love. The things I once loved I now hate." It's so important to incorporate both love and hate in the same conversation. Now, let me give you the dilemma. This stuff isn't easy. It's so easy to be careless with words and get the wrong reaction. What if you meant to say, "What's troubling you?" and instead you said, "What's wrong with you?" Can you imagine the difference? Just the mistake of one small word means all the difference in the world in the kind of reaction that you get. But here's the dilemma. To attack the problem but not the person. God's got the same dilemma. God says, "I love you, but I hate your sinful ways." Now, see, that's a challenge. To show somebody that you love them but you hate. How do you put love and hate in the same sentence? I'm telling you, it is essential to show your contempt for the problem and your concern for the value. These are not easy skills. You don't walk these summits of intellectual thought and word choice and emotional content and precision. You don't learn these overnight. But your commitment to excellence in communications can make all the difference in the world in how your economic and social and personal world works out. And here's part of the challenge. God says, "I love you, but I hate your sinful ways." Now, since me and my sinful ways are bound up so close together, I tend to take that personal. And God has to say, "No, no, no, let me make it clear one more time. I love you, but I hate your sinful ways." See, we've got to make that clear. You got to make it clear to your children. I love you, but I hate what you're doing and what it's doing to you. So you got to learn to put love and hate in the same sentence and to make the insidious as devastating and as ominous as it should be and make the opportunity as bright as it can be. But we've got to learn to paint by language and by emotions how much we hate the wrong in order to develop the good. And this is some stuff you can't be mild with. See, you can't take the mild approach to the weeds in your garden. You've got to hate weeds bad enough to go kill them. You say, well, I've learned to handle this stuff. This is not stuff you handle. This is stuff you devastate. This is stuff you've got to kill. If something is going after some treasure and some value, you've got to go after it with a high, hateful attempt by word, by language, by emotions, whatever is necessary to get the job done, to illustrate the evil and the possibility of good. Now, these are not easy skills. But if you want to extend your reach, in my opinion, you just have to engage in the confrontation. It's where the values are. Let me give you a good philosophical phrase. All values must be won by contest. All values must be won by contest. And after they've been won, they must be defended. You say, wow, you've put a pretty heavy task on us. That's what life is all about, a pretty heavy challenge. We don't give large trophies for small effort. If you want to win high health, if you want to win high wealth, if you want to extend a long reach in touching people's lives, you got to engage in some of these extra powerful disciplines. And one is to secure the territory by vigor, and the other is to defend it with equal challenge. Attack. Procrastination. Here's another good one, blame. I engaged in this the big share of my life until I met Mr. Show. I used to blame my negative relatives. I used to blame the government. I used to blame taxes. I used to blame prices. I said, it costs too much. Shoaff said, no, let's cover the real problem. You can't afford it. I thought, wow, I never looked at it like that before. Shoaff said, sir, you must intellectually understand, it's not it that's your problem. It's you that's your problem. It's not out there that's the problem. Out there is like it's been for 6,000 years. You can't cure that. But what you can cure is errors in judgment, errors in attitude, errors in activity, errors in misjudging results. I found that the errors were within. But see, he had to go after me on that point. Here's the next one. Excuses. Wow. We've got 1,000,000. I'm too short. I'm too tall. I'm too old. I'm too young. I don't have the money. I don't have the experience. On and on and on with the excuses. Learning to attack. Very important. Now here's what we call tools of last resort. Here's part of the attack you can use. And if you learn these skills, no telling who you can help. But you must save these for what we call tools of last, underline last resort. These are some things you don't use up front. Here's the first one, a direct attack. You've got to be very careful of a direct attack so that it not be misjudged in severity. Next is scolding. You've got to be very careful of scolding. You only use it as a last resort. Somebody walks in late, you say, where have you been? See, that's loaded with insinuations. Loaded. You got to be very careful. Only use it as a last resort. If you have to resort to it, you have to, but don't use it up front. Okay, we call save these. Save these for when the occasion calls for such harsh language to go after something. And the last one is sarcasm. Sarcasm can be useful, but you got to save it. Who do you think you are? See, that's powerful language, but you got to save it for when it is meaningful to use such powerful language. Matters of the heart are delicate. Here's what we teach. Don't operate on the heart with a hatchet. When you use these tools, you got to be very careful to save the value and go after the problem. Now let me give you the real clue. The more you care, the stronger you can be. People don't mind you using strong language about insidious things. They don't mind you becoming sharp, powerful. As long as you care, and the more you care, the stronger you can be. I don't mind a minister consigning my soul to hellfire for my sinful ways. I don't mind that, as long as he does it with tears and not with joy. But wouldn't we all resist a dry-eyed sermon on hellfire? You can't preach hellfire without your heart breaking. You got to sob your way through a sermon on hellfire. Or we all would resist a dry-eyed attempt to preach on hellfire. Why? A simple, obvious lack of really caring. And there are some subjects you cannot even deal with unless your heart breaks and unless visibly it shows by the emotional content that you really care. Now you can deal harshly with some powerful, important problems. Tools of last resort. Attacking the problems, but not the person. Just by way of review, we've been covering the major parts in a presentation, whether it's to a child or a business audience or a sales situation. All of us have the opportunity to affect somebody with words. And we talked about making the presentation that comes in 4 parts. Number 1, identification. Learning how to relate to somebody else, which is pretty easy if somebody's like you, pretty difficult if somebody's not like you. There's a difference in color, a difference in religion, a difference in age, a difference in experience, background. It gets a little more complicated, but it can be mastered. And all you have to do is refine these skills to have a longer reach, economically, socially, personally. Deal in subjects that make you real. Tell your story with authority. Next is the logic and reason part. Not too many facts. There's probably about 1,000 facts about an automobile, but you don't need them all to make a decision. About a half a dozen will do. And if you stretch it beyond the half dozen, it's pretty easy to lose your audience. So, brief on logic and reason. Number 3 was learning to attack the problems, but not the person. Number 4, in making the presentation, solution. So we've got identification, logic, attacking the problems, and offering solution. This is what we call solutions. Painting results in advance. This is an exciting part about the human experience, the ability to paint results in advance. We call it borrowing from the future. One of the reasons for living is to borrow from the future. If you can't see the future, it makes today pretty desperate. If you can't see the future, it makes your steps uncertain. Why bother to learn the skills and pay the price and go through all of the calisthenics and all of the trials of learning and growing and changing if you can't see the future? If there is no future, if there is no promise. So this is one of our great challenges, to do 2 things. 1, paint for ourselves the future, results in advance, borrowing from the future. But when you stop to think about it, that is a tremendous, unique experience, being able to borrow from the future, bring it to the present, and use it as an incentive to go get the job done, to learn the skills and put those skills to work. So painting results in advance, whether it's money results, whether it's position results, possibilities, opportunities, putting the person you're talking to in the future position, I can see you now, solutions. And it can be very powerful. Very powerful. What makes the farmer work all spring and toil all summer? His vision of the harvest. If he couldn't see the harvest, he wouldn't put the plow in the ground. If he couldn't visualize the opportunity, the chance to cash in and to turn wheat into money and money into lifestyle, if you couldn't see all of this, why would you put the plow to the soil? And the answer is, of course, why? If you can't see, why labor? And if the promise isn't clear, why put out the effort? So one of the ways to get people to respond, to put out the effort, to read the books, make the decisions, whatever it is you want them to do, part of the key is to offer the solution and be able to paint it in no uncertain terms. Jesus said to his disciples one day, if you'll stick with me and plant the roots deep in our Christian ideology, this philosophy, he said, if you will walk the streets, if you'll pour your heart and soul into this enterprise, if you will touch every human you can touch, if you'll cross the oceans, if you will fling yourself on the known world, And it isn't going to be easy. Spreading the ideas, spreading what we've been going through the last 3.5 years. He said it isn't going to be an easy task, but he said, I promise you, after you have finished this rather difficult task of putting all of your energy, time, and effort into the enterprise, he said, I promise you, when it's finished, in my Father's house are many mansions. Wow. See, that's clever. He put the mansion shot on them. No wonder they walk the streets. All you have to do is read the book of the activities. And they crossed the oceans, they walked the streets, they touched every human they could touch. They put every ounce of energy and mind and soul and spirit into this philosophy. And they did it right up until the time they forfeited their life, most of them, for the opportunity. No wonder it's lasted for 2,000 years. But the enterprise also had the promise. And wouldn't you put out some effort if somebody that was credible told you about such a unique promise? And the answer is, of course. All we have to do is to see the promise clearly enough, and we will do some amazing things.